Most women have no idea how deeply a man remembers the one who made him feel his soul. He may forget her birthday, the way she wore her hair, the perfume she used, but what he cannot forget, what haunts him in the silent hours when the world has stopped performing, is how he felt when she stood in front of him like a mirror to his unhealed parts. Not the girl who chased him, not the one who begged for his love, but the woman who saw him, truly saw him, and then walked away. She didn't scream, she didn't slam doors, she didn't make a spectacle. She simply vanished into herself, into the quiet dignity of self-respect. And that silence became louder than any words she could have spoken. That absence began to echo through his life like a cathedral bell, long after her footsteps faded. Because what most men don't realize, until it's far too late, is that there is a certain kind of woman who does not just pass through your life. She alters it. Psychologically, this woman awakens the anima within him, Jung's concept of the feminine aspect of the male unconscious. She stirs something ancient in his psyche, something forbidden, something wild. She evokes both longing and fear, attraction and resistance, because she doesn't play by the rules of submission or seduction. She knows her worth, and in doing so, she threatens every illusion his ego ever constructed. When a man meets a woman who has done her shadow work, who has looked into the abyss of herself and not run, he is meeting more than a romantic partner. He is meeting his reckoning. She is not just a lover. She is a mirror. And not the kind that flatters, the kind that reveals. He can forget the woman who fit into his expectations, but he can't forget the one who shattered them. You see, this is the forbidden psychology they don't talk about. The kind that isn't written in mainstream relationship advice columns. The kind that lives beneath the surface of polite attraction dynamics. A man may claim he wants peace, submission, or consistency, but the woman who lives in his subconscious memory is the one who made him question who he really is. And why? Because she refused to orbit around his chaos. She chose to orbit around herself. Her center was not in him. Her validation was not outsourced. She didn't need to be chosen to feel valuable. She was valuable. And that terrifies the kind of man who hasn't yet met himself. She wasn't playing a role. She wasn't pretending to be less so he could feel like more. She walked like a storm and still carried silence like a prayer. He couldn't manipulate her because she had nothing to prove. He couldn't wound her because she had already healed from deeper cuts than he could ever deliver. She was dangerous in the most sacred way, not because she could hurt him, but because she made him see himself. And that is unforgettable, because what do you do with a woman who doesn't need saving, who doesn't cling, doesn't chase, doesn't collapse into you? What do you do with a woman who can love you fully but will walk away if her soul is not honored? You remember her. Every time a shallow connection leaves you empty. Every time a game feels exhausting. Every time a pretty face can't hold your attention past the first conversation. You remember the woman whose energy lingered, the one who knew your patterns, your projections, your pain, and chose not to play along. The one who smiled at your defenses, saw through your performance, and loved you anyway, but didn't stay. And no, it wasn't pride that made her leave. It was clarity, because she had done the work. She had met her own shadows and befriended her solitude. She had turned her wounds into wisdom. And so when she looked at you, she wasn't looking to be completed. She was looking to connect. And when she saw that you weren't ready to meet her there, she left, not out of anger, but out of truth. It wasn't personal. It was necessary. Because a woman like that doesn't trade her peace for potential. She doesn't water dead things. She doesn't perform for love. She remembers what it took to become whole, and she honors that journey enough to never betray it. So she became unforgettable, not by design, but by essence. And while you may try to replace her, recreate her, even resent her, you will not forget her. Because what you felt was not possession. It was presence. It was the trembling awareness that for a moment you were standing in the presence of the divine feminine, unmasked, unapologetic, and untamed. He doesn't understand it at first, the pull he feels, the way his thoughts drift back to her like a tide returning to shore. It's not logical, it's not convenient, it's not even welcome, because it disrupts everything. But the psyche is not ruled by logic. The soul does not ask permission before it marks a moment, a person, a presence as sacred. And once it has, there's no going back to sleep. He may try to reduce it, label it as nostalgia, obsession, or fantasy. But the truth is deeper, more primal, more archetypal. She was not just a woman. She was an activation. She entered his life as a living embodiment of what Carl Jung called the Anima figure, the soul image of the feminine that resides in every man's unconscious. And when a man encounters a woman who embodies aspects of his anima, when she is both familiar and foreign, comforting and disruptive, it triggers a psychic charge that binds memory to feeling in a way that time cannot erase. This is not merely romantic attraction. It is a confrontation with the self. Because what she stirred in him was not just desire. It was recognition. A recognition of everything he has disowned, everything he has avoided, everything he once buried beneath stoicism, bravado, and detachment. Her laughter made his chest ache because it reminded him of his own stifled joy. Her silence pierced him because it mirrored the emptiness he carried inside. Her gaze unsettled him because it saw not just the version he showed the world, but the boy underneath. The one still aching to be held, still waiting to be enough. And when a woman becomes that kind of mirror, the ego revolts. He resents her power, not because she dominates, but because she doesn't need to. Her strength is not aggression, it is wholeness. Her allure is not manipulation, it is magnetism. She walks through the world as though she is already claimed by herself. And that kind of sovereignty awakens a crisis in the man who has not yet claimed his own soul. That crisis is where the forgetting ends. He can try to move on, try to explain it away, try to bury her in distractions, in other bodies, in newer smiles. But the body remembers, the soul remembers. And beneath it all, the memory of her becomes a haunting, a sacred wound, a place in his chest where something true once lived and left its mark. Not all wounds are meant to bleed. Some are meant to burn, slowly, silently, until they carve wisdom into the marrow. The psychology behind why he can't forget her isn't because she was perfect. It's because she was true. Uncompromisingly, unapologetically true. And that truth made him feel something he wasn't ready for. Himself. That is why she lingers. Not because of how she looked, but because of how he felt when she stopped performing and simply stood there in the full force of her essence. Radiant, rooted, real. She forced his unconscious to awaken. And awakenings, once tasted, are not so easily erased. You, woman, may have doubted your impact. You may have questioned your presence because he didn't choose you. But let this be known. The ego may not choose the one who awakens it. It will often run. It will reject the mirror that shows its cracks. But the soul always remembers the one who brought it to its knees. So do not shrink to be remembered. Do not contort to be kept. You are not meant to be forgettable. You are meant to be unforgettable, not because of how you bend, but because of how you rise. This is the tragedy and the beauty of psychological imprinting. We remember not what pleased us most, but what changed us. And you, in all your silent power, your still defiance, your sacred boundaries, you changed him. Maybe not into the man you hoped, maybe not in the way that stayed, but into the man who could no longer pretend, into the man who would spend nights trying to explain why no one else feels quite like you, because it was never about what you gave, it was about what you revealed. There is a reason the deepest imprints are left not by the loudest, but by the most still. He cannot forget her, not because she clung, not because she pleaded, but because she didn't. Because she left without begging, without screaming, without needing to prove her value. She walked away with her head high and her soul intact, and in that departure she became eternal in his unconscious. Jung called this the realm of archetypes, timeless, universal patterns that live in the collective psyche. She did not become unforgettable because she fit his fantasy. She became unforgettable because she awakened something older than memory, deeper than logic. She became symbolic. The woman who stands rooted in her own knowing is not seen through the eyes, she is felt through the bones. This is the forbidden truth that modern love often avoids. The psychology of male longing is not tethered to how much he was loved, but to how deeply he was seen. And most men, truthfully, do not know what to do with that kind of woman. Because they were not raised to face themselves, they were raised to chase validation, dominance, and escape. But she gave him no such refuge. She didn't coddle his ego, she didn't stroke his wounds with sweet lies. She stood there as the storm and the sanctuary, demanding nothing, offering everything real. And in that moment, he was stripped. No masks, no games. Just the raw, terrifying, liberating truth. He was seen. And when you are truly seen, you either rise or you run. He ran. Maybe not physically, but emotionally, spiritually, he fled. Because to stay would have meant to change. And change is the death of comfort, the death of illusion, the death of the persona he had spent years perfecting. So he chose familiarity over fire, safety over sovereignty. He chose the known path over the sacred woman who dared him to forge a new one. And yet, in doing so, he doomed himself to a lifetime of half-measures, half-loves, half-truths. Because once you've met the woman who carries the storm and doesn't flinch, the rest feel like whispers against the roar of her memory. You see, she did not try to be unforgettable. That was never the goal. She was simply herself. And the world is not used to a woman who is unapologetically whole. Most are taught to edit, to soften, to shrink. But she didn't. She walked with her shadows. She wore them like jewels, not to seduce but to exist. She didn't demand worship, she demanded presence. And he, unprepared, tried to make her fit into the mold of what he could handle. But she wouldn't shrink, and so he tried to forget. But the psyche does not forget a woman who embodied the unconscious dream. The anima in flesh, the myth incarnate. Her energy lives in him now, haunting the hallways of his solitude, whispering in the quiet moments when the distractions fade. He remembers the depth of her eyes, not because they were beautiful, but because they saw too much. He remembers the way her silence made him speak truths he didn't know he held. He remembers the unbearable peace of her presence, that rare, rare energy that asked for nothing but truth. She wasn't addictive, she was revealing. And he will never be the same. You, the woman who walked away, you weren't too much. You were just enough to awaken what he was not yet ready to meet. But that's the paradox, isn't it? The feminine energy that heals is also the one that disrupts. The woman who feels like home is also the one who sends a man on a hero's journey. Because her love is not comfort, it is initiation. It is sacred fire. It is the mirror in the cave. And not every man is ready for the cave. So if you're wondering why he never forgot you, it's because his soul couldn't. Not because of some chemical high, not because of fleeting passion, but because you touched the place where his truth lives. You didn't fall into his arms. You stood in front of him like a gateway, and he flinched. But he'll remember, in his quietest hour, when the world no longer distracts him, he will feel it, the weight of what he could not hold. Long after she's gone, her shadow still lingers, not as a ghost that haunts, but as an imprint. A psychic signature. A scar carved not by pain, but by presence. And that's the kind of scar that never truly fades. It becomes part of his architecture, embedded in the scaffolding of his emotional body. What she awakened wasn't just longing, it was remembrance of who he could have been, of the path not taken, of the man he glimpsed in her gaze, stronger, deeper, more conscious than the version he had been living. And it hurts, not because she left, but because in her leaving, she took the mirror with her, the one that showed him his future self. He will search for that reflection again, in other women, in other bodies, in other moments, but it will never feel quite the same. Because what he misses isn't just her. It's the man she pulled from him. That's the cruel beauty of individuation, Jung's great psychological goal. To become whole, one must face the fragmentation within. But not all are ready. Most would rather stay divided, distracted, unprovoked. And yet, once you've met someone who calls your soul to rise, the mundane begins to taste like dust. You see, she wasn't the fantasy. She was the catalyst. He didn't fall for her because she played some game of feminine charm. He fell because her presence dismantled his illusions. She did not flatter his mask, she pierced it. And what lives beneath the mask is always trembling, always tender, always afraid. So he retreated, not because she was too much, but because she wasn't willing to be less. He tells himself stories to cope, that she was unstable, too intense, emotionally distant. But deep down, in the quiet of his subconscious, he knows she was the most real thing he ever touched. And now he is starving for reality in a world that rewards performance. He scrolls, he drinks, he fills the void with noise, but the ache remains. Because the woman he can't forget is not the one who filled his desires. She is the one who disrupted them. She is the woman who made him question whether the life he built was one of truth or just habit. And here lies the great irony of love and loss. He didn't lose her because she stopped loving him. He lost her because she refused to abandon herself to keep him. And she could have. She could have played smaller, bit her tongue, pretended not to notice his disappearing acts, his emotional withholding, his inner chaos dressed in composure. She could have made herself easier to swallow. But she didn't. Because she had tasted the bitterness of self-betrayal before. She had learned, through pain and healing, that love built on the sacrifice of soul is not love. It's submission. So she chose herself. And in doing so she taught him the most unforgettable lesson of all. That a woman's worth is not measured by her ability to endure what wounds her, but by her willingness to walk away from what doesn't honor her. He may never say it out loud. He may never thank her. But he knows she was the one. Not because she stayed, but because she knew when to leave. She left not in anger, but in integrity. Not to hurt, but to heal. She left because staying would have meant abandoning the very self she fought so hard to reclaim. And that kind of exit, that silent, sovereign departure, is burned into a man's subconscious forever. He will measure others against her, even when he pretends he's moved on. He will feel the lack in every connection that doesn't reach that depth. Because with her, it wasn't just love. It was awakening. It was remembering who he might be if only he had dared to grow. So understand this, the woman he can't forget is not the one who made herself unforgettable. It's the one who refused to dim. It's the woman who was both mirror and mystery. The one who offered the kind of intimacy that stripped away artifice, the kind of silence that forced truth to rise, the kind of presence that left no place to hide. She was a rite of passage, a storm that shaped his landscape, a whisper from the universe that said, "There is more in you, if you're brave enough to meet it." And in her absence, that whisper becomes thunder. There is a sacred violence in being remembered by someone you no longer touch. She lives now not in his arms, but in his psyche, in the shadows behind his laughter, in the silence after his conquests, in the emptiness that no noise can fill. She exists in him as a memory he can't fully access, yet can't escape. Not a memory of events, but of essence. Because she was never merely a chapter. She was the threshold, the dividing line between the man he was and the man he could have become. Her presence forced open the door to individuation, and his refusal to step through it is what makes her unforgettable. This is the forbidden psychology they never taught him, that love isn't just warmth and desire. True love is evolution, and evolution demands death, the death of the ego, of patterns, of false identities. But he wasn't ready to die to himself. He wasn't ready to rise. So he ran. But the psyche does not forget what challenged its limitations. It clings to it, obsesses over it, returns to it in dreams, in fantasies, in sudden waves of grief that have no logical source. And that's the curse and the gift of loving a woman who walks in her full archetypal power. She wasn't easy to hold, but that's because she wasn't made to be held. She was made to be met. And meeting her means meeting the feminine in its purest form. Not the domesticated muse, not the performative pleaser, but the fierce, soft, sovereign woman who dances with the wild and sits comfortably with the sacred. The woman who demands nothing, yet awakens everything. You can't consume her. You can only be changed by her. That change terrifies the man who clings to comfort, and yet the change is the very thing he craves in the secret chambers of his heart. So she stays with him, not as a person, but as a possibility. He walks through life now haunted by the contrast, the women who speak but do not say anything, the moments that touch the body but leave the soul untouched, the hollow affections, the performative intimacy, the shallow validations. None of them hold the gravity she carried in a single glance. Because she didn't need him to find her value. She found it in herself, in the ruins of old selves, in the silence of long nights, in the blood of every boundary she ever set. She forged her worth, not in his hands, but in her own fire. And a man cannot forget the woman who lit that fire in him, then walked away when he refused to burn. There's something eternal about that kind of absence. It becomes a myth, a living parable, the story he tells himself, not out loud, but in the aching center of his solitude. The one that begins with, "She was the one who saw me," and ends with, "and I wasn't ready." Do you understand the power of that? Not the power of being remembered, but the power of choosing not to be diminished, just to be kept. The woman who is unforgettable is not the one who molded herself to his needs. She is the one who refused to collapse. And in that refusal, she carved herself into his soul. Because the mind forgets what flatters the ego, but the soul never forgets what awakens it. He may have forgotten the sound of her voice, but he will never forget how it silenced the noise in his head. He may not remember her favorite color, but he will remember the moment her eyes looked through him and saw, not the mask, not the armor, but the truth. She didn't fall in love with the man he showed her. She loved the man buried underneath. And that is precisely why he couldn't hold her. Because to love her back, he would have had to become that man. And he wasn't ready. But now, no matter how far he runs, he carries her with him, not in longing, but in lack. She became the sacred ache, the symbol of his untapped depth, the echo of the version of himself he abandoned the day he let her go. He will never forget her, not because she tried to be unforgettable, but because she remembered herself, and in doing so, forced him to remember what he had forgotten. The woman who sees herself can never be unseen. And so time passes. He fills his life with structure, with order, with faces that smile easily and never ask too many questions. He builds, he earns, he collects accomplishments like armor, thinking they will quiet the echo she left behind. But they don't, because you cannot silence the soul with things. You cannot replace the sacred with the safe. She was never just a person. She was a pattern breaker, a guardian of thresholds. The kind of woman who doesn't just walk into a man's life, she rearranges the furniture of his psyche, and when she leaves, nothing fits the way it did before. Every connection feels a little too light, every conversation a little too rehearsed. He doesn't know how to explain it, but he feels it, the absence of depth. Because she didn't offer him a love that coddled his wounds, she offered him a love that revealed them. She didn't try to heal him. She refused to play the nursemaid to his unconscious. Instead, she stood in the full weight of her sovereignty and in doing so called forth his. But that's the kind of woman you can't hold unless you're willing to hold yourself. And now she walks alone, not out of bitterness, but out of truth. There is no resentment in her silence, only wisdom. Only the stillness that comes when a woman no longer abandons herself to prove she's lovable. She doesn't need to be remembered. She doesn't need to haunt him. She has become whole. She has stepped beyond the narrative where she is defined by who remembers her or who regrets her absence. She has crossed into the sacred space of self-possession, no longer seeking to be chosen because she knows. She chooses herself. Again and again, in every moment, in every breath, in every sacred no, and every sovereign yes. She chooses peace over proving, essence over image, silence over struggle. She is no longer trying to be unforgettable. She simply is. And him? He may never reach the place she now lives. He may never follow the map she offered him. But that's no longer her concern. She has released the need to be his lesson. She has surrendered the desire to be his mirror. She has walked out of the narrative entirely, and in doing so, reclaimed the most powerful form of love, the one that asks for nothing in return. This is the ultimate individuation, not the isolation of self, but the integration of soul, the knowing that she is not here to complete anyone, but to live, to move, to be in her fullness. She is no longer the chapter in his story. She is writing her own, and maybe one day he will find his way. Maybe he will rise. Maybe he will become the man she saw in him, the one who was hidden beneath all the armor and fear, or maybe not. But either way, it no longer defines her, because the woman he can't forget has remembered who she is. She has stepped out of the shadow of needing to be wanted and into the light of being. The echo of her still lives in him, yes, but she no longer looks back, because what was once pain has become power, what was once grief has become grace, what was once longing has become liberation. She is not bitter, she is better. Not for him, not for the world, but for herself, because in the end, the woman who walks away doesn't do so to be chased. She does so because she knows the way home. And the truth is simple, eternal, unshakable. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses.